Good morning and happy Sabbath, church. Boy, it's good to be here worshiping with you today. So blessed. Praise God. You know, as we were worshiping there, I want you guys to know something that you may not know just being here in this sanctuary and being a part of this service. Some of you, of course, know exactly what I know as well, but these people that were up here leading us in songs today, that was real. It's not a performance. This. I know these people, and this is their faith. This is their worship. This is them relating to their God and leading you in relating to God. I just was so blessed just being a part of this worship service. Praise God for your gifts that you've given Him. Because, like I said, it's real. And part of what that means is I know these people, and none of them are perfect. None of them walk on water. I'm not perfect. I don't walk on water. We're all flawed and we're broken and we're navigating our way through life. But when we gather and we worship, it's real. And it's such a beautiful thing. And I just was so blessed. Thank you so much for sharing that with us here today. Hillary, thank you for that prayer as well. And let's begin here today with this message that I have to share with you today. Let me count the ways. Sound familiar? It should. Elizabeth had a lung condition which progressed as she got older. And she had this father that was very protective and caring for her, as fathers can often be. And his precious little girl was so precious to him that he spoiled her too much. He could, after all, because he had a mansion with 20 bedrooms and servants and maids and people to care for every need of the members of the family. And so Elizabeth got some extra special care as she was growing up, to such a degree that with her lung condition and her frail physical functionality, she actually became so dependent that she was essentially bedridden. Not only was she bedridden, though, but she, in her time that she had at her disposal, she did put some of that time to good use and became a very skilled writer, to the extent that by the time she was 32 years old, she was a very popular and published author and a literary critic, highly respected. At around the same time, Robert was also a writer. He lived in a different city and a different place, and yet in the literary world, his writings and Elizabeth's writings were within the same community and assessed by the same basic critics. And Robert was also trying to advance his writing career, but not experiencing quite the same success that Elizabeth had. In fact, quite frankly, the critics were really hard on Robert. As they read his writing, the reviews that he got were not encouraging. They were not very complimentary. And Elizabeth, being a very gifted writer herself, couldn't quite figure it out. After all, Robert's stuff was pretty good. And one day she just kind of had it, and she actually began to write like letters to the editor, responses to the critics, defending Robert and saying, you're missing something. You're not fully and fairly evaluating Robert's writing. This stuff is good. And Robert saw the response from her, and there was something in him that had always admired her writing and admired who she was, even though he had never met her in person. And when she stood up for him and defended him, Robert said, this is the girl for me. He was in love. And he never actually met her. And it's hard to imagine in our day and age because, in our day and age, Robert and Elizabeth would have both been on Instagram. And they would have had Twitter accounts, and they would have been these public figures that would be very well known and well recognized, and we would know everything about them. They'd be on Wikipedia. But back in those days, a politician could say that his opponent looked like a donkey, and people didn't know any better. They think he really did. And so He had never seen her before, but he just had to meet her. And so he contacted her and said, "Thank you so much for the affirmation that you've given to my writing. I would just love to meet you." And Elizabeth said, "Well, I'm not so sure that's such a good idea. Congratulations on being better received in the literary community. Enjoy your writing future and career." And she kind of pushed him aside a little bit. And Robert wouldn't take no for an answer. And he just continued to say, "No, I have to meet you. I want to get to know you better. I want to get to know you." And of course, Elizabeth, she knew the rest of the story. She knew she was bedridden. She knew she was homebound. She wasn't the person Robert thought she was. So he wouldn't take no for an answer. One day he just finally showed up, sort of invited, but sort of not, He showed up at the home, and one of the servants escorted him up to her room. And there, under the supervision of the wait staff of the home, he met her for the first time. And they spent time together reading and writing and sharing poetry with one another, and they both fell in love. Robert noticed as he was there visiting her on occasion at her room that she had quite a bit of functionality. It's not like she was paralyzed. And he wondered, "Why don't you walk? Why don't you move? Why don't you do more?" And he said, "Well, I just really can't." And he'd say, "Well, what about this and what about that?" And within a little while, Robert became her, didn't call it back then, but her physical therapist. He rehabbed her from a bedridden state to a young woman who could walk and move and go places and do things. She still had the respiratory illness, though, and one day they were talking about it, and he said, "I think your breathing and your functionality would be a lot better if we were in Italy instead of here in England. It's so humid, it's so wet. Let's go to Italy together." And she said, "Oh, Father would never allow it. Father doesn't really like you very much, Robert. I like you, but Robert, he would never give my hand to you in marriage and let us run off together like this." And he said, "So let's not ask Father. Let's just go." And she thought, and now she could walk, and now she could move. I mean, her physical therapist had done his job. She was ready to run away with him. See, ulterior motive. And so one day they did. They left, and they went down to the church with one of the servants, and they got married. And they actually hid it from Father for a while. She came back home, and they just continued to act like, everything was normal. But then one night, when everything was ready, and at just the right time, they snuck off together. They ran off together, and they went to Italy. Husband and wife. And their relationship and their love and their romance grew. And there in Italy, she did benefit, and she did breathe better, and she continued to get stronger and healthier. Her father was outraged, but she was free. And somewhere in the course of that life, she wrote this poem for Robert. "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the end of being an ideal of grace." Elizabeth spoke of a love so deep and wide that it could not be described by just one word. It was wide, and it was deep, and it was high, and high as her soul could reach. Yet it was out of sight and beyond being itself, and as wide and embracing as the grace of God. Elizabeth had an experience of love that she somehow tried to describe in words. She continued, "I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise." Elizabeth had some notion of a love that was pure, that was brave, that was strong, as bright as the sun and as dim as the candlelight, both needed and cherished in their proper place, proper environment, outside in the day or inside at night. A love that was loud and was quiet and was beautiful. She continued, I love thee with passion, with the passion put to use in my old griefs, and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with the love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall love thee better after death. Of course, her name, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, wife of Robert Browning, who you probably don't know as well as her because she was the shining light in that relationship. Love is one of those things that takes a lot of words to describe, to explain, and yet within our English language we're bound when it comes to love to essentially just one word. And quite frankly, it's a problem for us. Those of us that function with English, it's a problem because there needs to be more words for love. We were discovering this in Sabbath school class today as we were studying some scripture passages together. Mark was leading us in our Bible study. We came to this realization that we were using common terms like faith and sin and salvation, and we had never defined those terms. We just sort of assume that everybody knows what those words mean, but the reality is that we can oftentimes have conversations with people and use a word and not know what it actually means. In the process of having that conversation, if you don't know what the word actually means, there's no way to have any kind of real conversation about meaning at all. It's important to define words. And in English, we only have one word for love. Fortunately, there are other languages that expand the concepts and the ideas. The Greek language, for example, the language in which our New Testament was originally written, has 6 words for love. 6 words. There is, for example, there's xenia. This, if you went down south, you would experience xenia. It's hospitality, southern hospitality. Or if you were in a country in the Middle East, you may experience xenia, hospitality, where somebody comes and they visit your home and they're a complete stranger, but it doesn't matter because your culture is so embedded in the love of xenia that you invite them into your home and you feed them and you care for them. The part of the world we live in, back in the 1800s, they had kind of the code of the West. And that was that if somebody came to your cabin, if somebody came to your homestead, a wanderer came through, you invited them in and you fed them and you cared for them. It's the love of hospitality. It's a great kind of love. Wonderful kind of love. But there's another Greek word for love, and it's philautia. Philautia. Best way I can describe this kind of love is Whitney Houston sang about it as being the greatest love of all. Loving yourself. Philautia is self-love, the greatest love of all. Learning to love yourself, Whitney told us, is the greatest love of all. I don't agree with her, but sometimes people need a song like that, right? And people need to learn to love themselves. It's good. Good kind of love. There's another kind of love, a Greek word for love, and it's the Greek word storge. Storge is the kind of love that you know, possibly. You may not know it. But it's the kind of love that a parent has for their child. And so if you're a parent, you quite easily know what storge love is, right? Storge love is the kind of love where you would run out in front of a grizzly bear to save your child, and you become a grizzly bear if somebody else is hurting your child, right? That's Storge love. Parents' love. It's a powerful kind of love. It's a very deep affection, and it has an awful lot to do with the fact that this person is carrying your DNA around into the world, and maybe even your likeness to some degree or another, and you are highly invested in that human being. Good kind of love. And then there's another kind of love in the Greek language, and that is philia. And if you have good brothers or a deep sisterhood or friendship with people, you understand that kind of love. And it can be kind of a casual love. It can be kind of a shallow love. It may also be very deep. You don't really know until the chips are down and something really bad happens in your life, and then you discover how deep philia love really is. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. You find out when the chips are down, whether you have fair-weathered friends or whether you really have friends. And of course, in Greek language, there's another kind of love, and this is eros. It's more complex. It's the burning passion of sexual desire, but philosophers would also argue that it's not just about physical desire or attraction. It's an aesthetic appreciation. In his dualistic view of the universe, where the physical was seen as evil and the spiritual as good, Plato embraced eros as a means to escape the physical world and arrive upon a spiritual plane. It was a place where love is not a physical experience, but it is Platonic. A phrase actually borrowed from Plato's understanding of eros love, where each arrives at truth through aesthetic experience. If you see something and it's beautiful, you might say, "Oh, I love that." That too is eros. It's kind of a love of the eyes. It's loving what you see. It's based on aesthetics. It's based on experience, and it's oftentimes what we would call love at first sight, right? But there is one more, at least one more, Greek word for love. And this one, you may know, agape. We have agape dinners here at Wasatch Hill sometimes. And you come and you're like, I don't know what it is, agape, whatever that is, right? Or you know, and you've heard this many times, and you've heard this definition, and you've wrestled with it. But today we're going to take an even deeper look into what agape is. You see, to fully know and understand what agape love is, we need to think in an entirely different way. Because agape love is just different. We can't even really go to the Greeks to define their own word, because that word became so redefined by the New Testament authors that it took on a meaning that the Greeks didn't even conceive of, I don't think. To fully know what it is, we have to go back to last week's sermon and think about that submersible that went missing, and all the rescue efforts that went into trying to rescue people who were already condemned to death. To realize the power of agape, because agape is the kind of love that says, I know some people are lost, and I know the mission is impossible, and I know they're already dead, and I know there's no possible way of rescuing them, but I'm going to take everything I have, and I'm going to liquidate all of my assets, and I'm going to go and rescue them anyway. That's agape. And if I lose everything, and they are lost too, and everything is lost, I don't care. I'm doing it anyway. It's this kind of love. By this we know agape, that He, Jesus, laid down His life for us. 1 John 3:16. A lot like John 3:16, but a little different angle, a little bit different picture. Describing the kind of love, the definition of love that we have, that we get from God's rescue mission. God so agape'd the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish, but have eternal life. This is the verse that we looked at last week that is in the context of a sunken submersible, of people who are already condemned. They're already dead. Jesus didn't come, John says in verse 17, to condemn the world because the world was already condemned. He came to save the world and to seek and to save those who were lost. That's agape love. Agape love is willing to bet the farm. It's willing to give up everything. It's willing to sacrifice to the uttermost. It's willing to shed its own blood to save others. And then it's even more. The interesting thing is, John 3:16 tells us that God loved the world, and yet we don't have to go very far in John's writings before we find John telling us not to. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, but John, the same one who wrote that gospel quoting Jesus in John 3:16, tells us in 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. How much more redundant can you get? Don't love the world. I really mean it. If you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you. Well, how come God can do it then, right? Why can God love the world and I can't? Good question. Yeah, good question. Here we have it. For God so loved the world, but you better not. Is that what the Bible's telling us? And if so, what's the point? What's the lesson here? It's confusing, it's frustrating, it's difficult. We don't know for sure what to really do with these two Bible verses. John continues then, knowing possibly that we will be somewhat confused. John continues then to help us out with our notions of love. And so he says this, for all that is in the world. Here's why you shouldn't love the world. Here's why the love of the Father isn't in you if you love the world. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes, the pride of life, is not from the Father, but it's from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. Interesting. Let's break this down a little bit. I think we need to look into this a little bit deeper. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but it's from the world. Do you remember, as we were talking about the Greek definitions of the word, there was words for love. There is a kind of love that is more of an aesthetic kind of love. I love it because it's beautiful. I love it because it feels good. I love it because it makes me happy and proud about my life. Desires of the flesh. How do I feel? That's a kind of love. Desire of the eyes. Do I like what I see? Pride of life. Does it make me feel better than other people? John says those kinds of love are kinds of love, but they're not the kinds of love that are from the Father. They're the kinds of love that are from the world. And John seems to understand that there's a problem there. This word desires, we need to look into it a little bit more. It's this word epithumia. Epi usually means something like upon. You have an epidermis. Did you know that? Your skin is your epidermis. It's the outside of your body, largest organ in your body, I think, if I'm correct. Pretty important part of you. And it's on the outside. It's upon your body. That's the idea of epidermis. Epithumia is something that is upon someone. But what is thumia? Well, we know this word. We interact with this word all the time. We have a thermometer in our house. We have a thermostat in our house. We may even have a thermos that we carry a hot drink around in. What do all of those have in common? Something to do with heat, right? Something to do with warmth. Well, thumia is to burn. So epithumia is to burn upon. It's a passion. It's a burning kind of experience, this idea that John mentions here is to burn upon. That's what he's talking about in this verse. There's another word here, another thing that he speaks of, and that is this pride of life. Or you could say it this way, the pride of this life. When I think about this idea of the pride of life, by the way, this is also a compound Greek word. The thing I think of is you only go around once. So you might as well get everything out of life that you can because you're only here one time. So, what are you doing in church? You should be out partying. When I was a kid, there was a commercial on TV for a particular beverage that I won't mention by name. And the advertisement went like this. It had a huge impression on me, apparently, as a child, because I still remember it. Grab for all the... Oh, you know it. Grab for all the gusto you can get. Okay? Grab for all the gusto you can get. Now, as a kid growing up in northern Wyoming, I did not know the word gusto. No gusto. I didn't understand the word until I learned a little bit of Spanish, and I learned that when you greet somebody and you shake their hand, you're supposed to say mucho gusto, which scared me a little bit because I thought it meant much beer. Grab for all the gusto you can get. Somebody finally pulled me aside and said, no, that's not what it means. It means much pleasure, much joy. There's much pleasure, there's much joy in meeting you. That sounds like a good thing. But what if your life is all about pleasure? What if it's all about joy? What if it's just epithumia? Just grabbing for all the gusto that you can get, all the gusto you can get, because this is all there is after all. So get as much pleasure as you can. This pride of this life, we would call it, in modern terminology, we would call it hedonism. I'm just living to gratify myself. And by the way, I think it's important for us to recognize that as followers of Jesus, there's a tendency that we tend to have of pointing the finger at people. You start getting into these definitions of words, and boy, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, those people out there in the world, they're like that. You start pointing the finger. You ever notice when you point a finger, you've heard this many times, right? You have 3 other fingers pointing right back at you. It's true. Because I've become convinced of something, and this is not a criticism of Wasatch Hills or any of you personally. It may be more of a reflection upon myself, actually. But that is that, well, it's really easy for us to point the finger at other people and say, yeah, see, those people are hedonistic. They're just living for pleasure. I have to stop every once in a while, especially when I'm at the grocery store or the sporting goods store, and ask myself, or I'm especially driving by a car lot, and I have to ask myself, what am I living for? Why is it that some cars stir up an epithumia in me, right? That make me think I really need a car like that. And please understand, if you have a car like that, God bless you. I'm just talking about where I'm at on some of those things. Like I said, the grocery store. What kind of food am I most drawn to in the grocery store? Am I drawn to the food that's really healthy for me and is really going to make my body strong and represent God in this world in a healthy and strong way? Or am I drawn to the stuff that's going to give me a heart attack? Well, my wife can tell you the answer to that question. And it's self-gratification. It's hedonistic. It's the pride of life. I just want to please myself. It's the pride of this life. Grab for all the gusto you can get because That's all there is. And I want you to notice then that as we break down this verse, 1 John 2:16, for all that is in the world, the burning desires of the flesh, the burning desires of the eyes, and the pride of this life, the thing that so many people in our world are living for, including those of us within the church, including myself. I need point my finger no farther than right here. All those things, they're not from the Father, they're from this world. From this world. And then John drops this bombshell on his audience. And the world is passing away along with its desires. What is he saying? He's saying that looks like what it's all about, and that looks like what everybody should be grabbing for, all the gusto they can get. But it's important to recognize that that world is passing away along with its desires. Somebody can hear something like this and say, well, that's fear-mongering. You're just trying to scare people into the baptismal tank, Pastor. No, it's just reality. It's just true. And this man, an eyewitness of the living and dead and risen Christ, he knew it. He knew that he had experienced the kind of love that makes all the other kinds of love, 6 other Greek words of love, pale by comparison. He knew that nothing else measured up to the kind of love that he had experienced. And so he spoke to his audience and said, behold, the manner of love that God has given to us. Just take a look at the kind of love that God has given us, that we should be called children of God. That's what we are. There's no other love like it. And we can read that verse and say, oh yeah, that's nice, cute, sweet, sentimental. No. John is writing that with his heart truly burning for a kind of love that he can find nowhere else. So he says the world is passing away along with its epithumia, along with its burning desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever. Have you ever been in a situation where you were so glad to get off that boat? So glad to get off that floating piece of driftwood. So glad to get off that cliff. So glad to get out of that horrifying, terrible, near-death experience. And that's the kind of spirit that John expresses here when he says this. All those things, they're passing away. It's a sinking ship. Get off. Do the will of God. Stop doing your own will. Stop pursuing your own self-gratification and do the will of God, and you'll find genuine joy, genuine satisfaction, genuine love, genuine life. And then, later on in his letter, he says this, beloved, let us agape one another, for agape is from God, and whoever agapes, it's really bad Greek, has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. And what we see in this verse is we see an invitation to relationship. I can stand up here for about 30 minutes so far, and I can talk to you about love, but I can't make you feel it. I can't make you experience it. I can't give it to you. I can give you a warm handshake or a hug, and you won't get a taste of what agape is because I'm not the source of it. There may be a little bit of it trickling out of me from time to time, but I'm not the source of it. You ever experience any agape from any follower of Jesus, it's simply because they were connected to the source and there's a little bit of it leaking out of them. Whoever loves, John says, has been born of God. There's a whole new experience that's gone on here. And the tragedy is that we can grow up in the church, and we can grow up in a Christian home, and we can grow up going to church our entire lives and not be born of God. Not even have this experience. Not even know. I just do it because my parents did it. I'm just here because they were here. It's a culture now. It's a family now. It feels good. I look good when I go to church. Does that sound familiar? It feels good. I look good. I'm proud to go to church. John says all those things are passing away. You need a better kind of love. You need the kind of love that comes from being born of God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. God is agape. Agape is God. But should you make the mistake of thinking that God is just some kind of esoteric force out there, may the force be with you. No, he's a person. He's real. He's so loved that he intentionally and on purpose sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him, and he's a person, shall not perish but have everlasting life. It's this kind of love. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. My love is deep. My love is wide. My love is high. It's as high as my soul can reach. It's farther than I can reach. It's to the ends of my being. It's the ideal grace. It's a love that is to the level of every day's most quiet need. It's as bright as the sun in the daytime, and it's as bright as a candle in the darkest place. It's free, but it takes courage. It's pure, and it seeks no praise. It's passionate. Hits us where we hurt, and it heals us. It's a childlike faith. It's a childlike love that believes in a real God who is unconditional in his love. It's the kind of love you feel when you think about the old folks who have died, the saints who have passed away. And it's part of our breath, it's our smile, it's our tears, it's all of our life. And it's a love that we barely know now. Now we see in part. We see as through a glass darkly. We know in part, and we prophesy in part, but a day is coming where we will see face to face, and then we will fully know, even as we are fully known, the Apostle Paul says. We will fully love, even as we are fully loved. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Sounds a lot like a hymn. My Jesus, I love thee. I know thou art mine. To thee all the follies of sin I resign. The gracious Redeemer. If ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now.